Welcome to Crime Survivor Speed Podcast. My name is Aswad Thomas. I'm the National Director of Crime Survivor Safety and Justice. We are a growing national network, over 200,000 victims of crime across the country. If you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, you can do that and stay up to date on the latest episodes by going to YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other streaming services by clicking the link on your screen or going to the website at www.cssj.org/podcast. Oh man, one thing I love about this podcast is being able to talk to the amazing survivor leaders across the country. So today we are thrilled to welcome Rafiah Muhammad-McCormick to the podcast. Rafiah is a dedicated victims advocate from Tennessee who is committed to removing barriers to victim compensation and also supporting violence prevention initiatives as well. Rafiah is so passionate about restorative justice and also the power of redemption to prevent future violence and heal communities impacted by trauma. Rafiah serves as the Director of Community Outreach for Tennesseans for Alternative to the Death Penalty. She's also the founder of Rodney's Village, a nonprofit currently in its launch phase. Additionally, Rafiah plays a vital role in Mothers Over Murder, a flagship program of Nashville peacemakers that uplifts survivors of violent crime. So we're excited to learn more about all of the amazing work that you do, Rafiah. So welcome to the Crime Survivor Speak podcast.
I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you on. Let's dive into it. To begin, I'd love for you to share how you first got involved with Crime Survivor Safety and Justice, and how has the community supported you in Tennessee?
Definitely. I first got involved with CSSJ, Crime Survivor Safety and Justice, back in June of 2022. Somebody had sent me a webinar that I might be interested in watching that you, Aswad, were hosting back then. And when I listened to that webinar, I was just totally enthralled. I had been sitting in circle with my grief support group, Mothers Over Murder, and I was applying for victims' compensation probably around 2021. And I remember that a lot of the moms in our group had told me, don't even waste my time trying to apply. Everybody gets denied. So when I heard about this webinar, when I listened to it and heard about the legislation that was being done across other states, I was so excited. And at the same time, I found my community. A lot of survivors of violent crimes, specifically other mothers that have lost their children, had not found that space of restorative justice and focusing on redemption. And so I had felt like a unicorn at that time. And so when I heard the webinar and read Aswad's story, I felt like I had found my space.
Awesome. You shared that you found your survivor community. Would you tell us, as much as you're comfortable sharing, about your survivor story that led you to your victim advocacy work, especially the incredible work you do around restorative justice?
I think I found that space toward redemption and rehabilitation and restoration a lot earlier than many survivors. And this might sound crazy, but even though I lost my son so tragically, the things that surrounded it made me feel like God set me on that trajectory. But I lost Rodney July 9th of 2020. It was in my own backyard. I had just came home from work. It was shortly after people were returning to work after COVID. We had just finished beautifying the backyard. And so Rodney had a few friends over to take a dip in the pool and sit around the fire pit. And when I came home, I was like, hey, y'all just keep it quiet. I'm going to take a quick nap. At that time, I did a lot of work, global manufacturing. So I had clients across the globe, and sometimes I would be up as early as 4 o'clock in the morning and on the phone as late as midnight talking to somebody overseas. And so I frequently would take a nap after work just to be prepared if I had some stuff to do or meetings that night. And I woke up to the gunshots, jumped up, knew exactly what they were, even though I had not heard gunfire in many years. Living in the hood, but that had been many decades ago, 25 years ago, when Rodney was a little kid. So I hadn't heard gunshots in a long time, but I knew what they were. And I jumped up, went into the backyard, and separated Rodney from the young person that shot him. Not realizing that Rodney had been shot, didn't know what was going on. Everybody else had fled from the backyard. When I separated them, Rodney fell to the ground, and when the young man reached down to retrieve his weapon, is at that point when I realized that Rodney had been shot. My first instinct, of course, was to cover Rodney up to make sure that he didn't get shot again. And at that moment, I locked eyes with the boy that shot Rodney. And I remember saying, "Please don't." And I remember him's response being something, "Ma'am," with a look of remorse before he fled through the backyard. And even as we navigated the criminal's proceedings for the next year, that look never left me, even through my anger at him, at the system, at some points even wanting vengeance. It was that look that never left me, and ultimately in dealing with a sentence that we felt like we had no control over, I requested a restorative piece to be added into his sentence. Restorative sentence that wasn't even an option in our area. So I had to convince the district attorney to accept the sentence. I had to convince him to propose it to the defense attorney because they had already made their decision on what sentence that they were going to agree on. And the young man accepted the proposal despite his defense attorney recommending him not to accept it, because what he did is ultimately put himself in a position where an allied organization of mine would be part of his sentencing plan and would be giving progress reports to the people that was incarcerating him as well as his parole officer. Of course, you ask, why did this happen to us? The answer for me kept coming back that I was supposed to do something with this, that it didn't happen by accident. So I've been focused on using my voice to change that trajectory, change that narrative for victims that feel that the value of their lives or their loved ones' lives is measured by how long that sentence is for the person that has harmed them, and moving them away from that piece and instead looking at what can we do to encourage that individual to give back what they've taken.
Thank you for sharing your process of forgiveness, knowing the importance of rehabilitation, but also recognizing the remorse in the eyes of that young man and how that really helped you in some way, right? And also in some way helped that young man. And as you were talking, each episode, I'm always reflecting on my own experiences. And I remember that same experiences of talking to my district attorney. It was a teenager that was involved in my shooting. I remember asking the district attorney if I could go talk to that young man that had shot me. And I remember the DA saying, no, we don't allow our victims to talk to perpetrators. And for me, I just wanted to talk to that young man to see what he was going through, what led up to that shooting, but also wanted to let him know that I wasn't angry, right? And I remember just thinking about and hearing from the DA how much time that young man would be facing, which was about 40 years or more in prison. I remember going to the DA and asking them repeatedly if you all can offer him a plea deal. After me begging the DA to offer it to him, I think that's when my healing started, knowing that that teenager wouldn't be sentenced to 40 years in prison. He ended up taking that plea deal. He spent about 9 years in prison for my shooting. And that's what I wanted out of the justices. I wanted accountability for sure, but I also knew that I wanted that young man to come home one day and to be a productive member in society as well. And I think when you talk to crime victims, we all had different perspectives, and we all want a better justice system, which will really drive all of our work as well. So many survivors like you, out of your pain, your trauma, your not getting support, start amazing organizations. Your organization, Rodney's Village, is such an amazing tribute to your son's legacy. Can you tell us more about the vision behind your nonprofit and how it's helping to cultivate community support for young parents? And also, what are some of the most critical skills or systems of support that you think can break the cycle of violence that you provide at Rodney's Village?
Oh, yeah, definitely. The idea of Rodney's Village, it came about shortly after his death when I decided to retire from my career and do something in the community. The vision started there, but I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. I just knew that coming from my own background, in my career, we focused on root cause analysis and problem solving. And I could see that the things that were being done weren't working. And so when I was thinking about what I wanted to do at Rodney's Village, I didn't just want to come up with something that just dealt with the grief or dealt with the aftermath. I wanted to do something that focused on the potential root causes of violence in our communities. And our goal is to stop the violence by cultivating the community. We believe that begins with empowering young parents, many of whom are navigating parenthood without sufficient support or resources. We see these young parents, and I was a teenage parent. Rodney was a product of a teenage parent, and the young person that killed Rodney was a teenage parent. And so I looked at those commonalities, and that became my focus with Rodney's Village, that we focused on those parents that were aged 16 to 22 years old by equipping them with the skills and resources that they need to raise healthy families. We want to help them break those cycles of violence and basically create safer and more supportive communities in our cohort format. We have a 12-week program where we bring parents together. We take 12 participants, which is 6 couples. Now, they don't have to be in a relationship anymore. We focus on teaching them how to parent in a healthy environment, how to co-parent in a healthy environment, encouraging them to form a support system with the other members in the cohort, helping them with conflict resolution, emotional intelligence, financial literacy, and workforce development. We try to foster those connections and encourage those young parents to support each other because we believe that community care and collective growth are what's essential to breaking the isolation that often leads to destructive behaviors. With Rodney's Village, we believe that focusing on healthy parenting. I remember I used to cuss my kids out. Ooh, something horrible. I was a teenage parent. Even though I had good parents, my parents didn't cuss me out. I was angry. I was poor. My parents was mad at me because I had got pregnant at an early age. So I was already feeling isolated. And the first thing back then, this was in the era of beginning to remove corporal punishment. Can't hit your kids. Man, I cussed them poor kids out so bad it was horrible. But we know now that diminishes our children's value of who they are. It prevents them from being able to resolve conflict appropriately because it's a form of toxicity and it's a form of violence. Even though I had transformed my life over the last 25 years, and I think the life of Rodney as well, there's so much of that still out there. So we talk about emotional intelligence. A lot of people confuse emotional IQ with actual IQ. But a lot of individuals, no matter how smart they are, based off of the things that they have dealt with in their life and their inability to process and comprehend, also dictates how they react to certain situations. You ever find yourself talking to somebody that should know better? And you be like, okay, this person, they're a good student for the most part. What they used to say, common sense ain't so common. I think that's what we're talking about when we're talking about emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And if people don't know how to feed their kids, if they're struggling to get access to those resources, they can't get a job or they have to get a mediocre job. Both parents are working. Who's raising our children? I remember as soon as my oldest was old enough, I was leaving her at home alone with the rest of the kids while I worked because childcare was so high. And the community, we need to be supporting them. Not only we want to incorporate that village mentality inside this cohort, but we want to instill in our communities that this ain't a them problem. This is an all of us problem. And we need to be supporting these young people to the best of our ability to be able to raise their children in the best possible environment. And to do that, they are going to need support from all of us.
organizations like Rodney's Village and the services that you all provide, that is so important to actually violence prevention, right? Where you're helping people get access to the basic things that we need in life. When you give young parents who the service and support that they need to raise healthy children, all of that is like forms of violence prevention. That's how you stop the cycles of violence. So the Alliance for Safety and Justice and Crimes for Safety and Justice, we do a lot of different reports. We survey victims of crime across the country and ask them questions of what safety looks like to them. In September of this year, we released another report called Crime Survivors Speak 2024. And what made this report unique, because it was the largest commissioned survey of violent crime victims in the nation and asking them what does safety looks like to them. So some of the key findings we found from this report, we actually talked to victims of violent crime by a 3-to-1 margin. Victims believe that the most effective way to reduce crime is to create more jobs and housing instead of long sentences. In this report, more than 2 in 3 victims believe that mental health and addiction treatment or job training and placement are more effective strategies to stop repeat crimes than long sentences, right? By nearly 2-to-1 margin, victims of violence prefer investments in prevention, crisis assistance in communities over more spending on arrest and punishment as well. And through your work in Tennessee, seeking out alternatives to justice outside of the justice system's usual punitive approaches has been an important part of your journey. What do you think needs to happen for more communities in Tennessee and also across the country to adopt restorative justice practices as a way of addressing and preventing violence?
Thank you for asking that. And I do want to also thank CSSJ for the resources that y'all provide with those type of manuals and surveys, because I use those when I'm speaking to lawmakers, when I'm speaking to people in the community, when people need data to help them make the right decisions or at least buy into what you're talking about. So I really appreciate them. In Tennessee, I'm in the Nashville area. Nashville does now have juvenile restorative justice practices that are part of their juvenile justice sentencing protocol. Not as much focused on violent crimes. I do believe they have done 2 murders now, or 2 crimes that resulted in a person's death. We're trying to get them to a space of moving this into the adult system. We got a ways to go. You are so right. The victims that are here, once they're given that language, it's nothing for them to buy into it. It was a book, Until We Reckon, where there was an example saying if you only been given this choice of hamburger, you're going to think it's the greatest hamburger. And for too long, they've only been given the choice of more policing and being told that policing is what will keep them safe. But I think our victims' voices need to be the one to lead the way in changing that mindset around justice, where it's focused on healing and restoration and preventing harm, moving us from locking them up into understanding that repairing the harm is how we prevent it from happening again. Education and awareness. Storytelling advocacy is one of my main means of advocacy. And so giving a platform for victims to be able to share their story and be able to be uplifted, because once they start to feel empowered, it also enables them to start finding peace as well. Of course, they need the opportunity to express how they have been impacted. And like you said in the survey, most victims just want to be heard. I want to be acknowledged that I have been harmed. And then that way, once we get that part, then we can focus on what needs to happen in order for them to feel like the person has taken account. We need to create a supportive infrastructure. Like I said before, if victims know that those are the options that are out there, they're going to want to do restorative justice practices. It allows you to be able to find peace. It allows you to feel that how you've been impacted or harmed or how your loved one has been harmed was not all in vain. You changed the life of that person that done harm to you. I think one of the main things is that We have got to be able to organize our victims and our survivors to be able to be involved with policy reform and in communication with their lawmakers and legislators. And so that's one of the things I really love about CSSJ is because a lot of victims didn't even know that that's an option. I always tell them jokingly all the time, I'm like, there is no bars on the Capitol building. You are allowed to go in. And as much as possible, I try to take them in that space. And being able to do this victims' compensation work was a big way of allowing them to do that. And many individuals who had never been inside the Capitol building, had never sat inside of a legislator's office, had never seen what hearings look like. Understanding that your voice doesn't have to just look like voting, that you can actually have a part of this legislative process. So I think that's very important as well when we're talking about adopting or restorative practices. We have to do a better job of really showing how restorative justice is working, so that we can get that community buy-in and that trust. There are some players out there that are unfortunately very tough on crime, very pro-guns all in our street, that are starting to treat terms like restorative justice as like being the new woke. And so we have to do a really good job of showing and getting community buy-in that restorative practices work, showing them that it works, showing how those people are able to give back, showing how the recidivism rate is so low. We've been able to show, for example, that the organization that's been in our Nashville juvenile system, they have like a 99% success rate.
Wow.
So those type of things, we just have to keep giving them the platforms to move people away from the attractiveness of retribution.
And like the solutions are there, right? They're simple. It's like helping victims, restorative justice, building strong communities, investing in healing, helping people get access to jobs and housing. Like those are all of the evidence-based solutions and programs that work, right? So for a organization to have a 99% success rate, how do we actually invest in more of those type of programs, not only just for juveniles, but for adults across the country? But you also mentioned, and you gave us a teaser there, right, about the victim compensation work. So excited to hear more from you about the role that you've played, which has been an important role in advocating for victim compensation reforms in Tennessee. What are some of the barriers that you face or the families who you work with face?
Yeah, definitely. I think I alluded to earlier that when I would sit in circle with these other mothers, and there was about 25 of us. Out of those 25 mothers, I think 3 had got approved for the victim's compensation.
Wow.
And so I'm like, wait a minute, that's 75% denial. And so I went to go and look at our stats. After I watched your webinar, I took our victims' compensation, what we call it, criminal injuries compensation policy here in Tennessee. And I don't know if you remember this, but I took it and I did like this little comparative analysis like you do when you buy a car. And identify, okay, these are the legislation that we did in each one of these states, and then highlighted where in our criminal injuries bill policy could we be able to make a change if we were able to change that legislation inside of our own city. CSSJ and ASJ now provided a resource of giving somebody to help me with the research. I don't know if I'm allowed to shout her out, but Andy Gentile, she helped me. We would be on the phone all the time. She would lead me in the direction of how to pull that data from the DOJ website, that state data, and finding out that Tennessee had a 70+% denial rate of people who had actually applied for victims' compensation. Finding out that 90% of victims don't even apply because they're discouraged. And I was like, oh my God, the only thing that you have in place is this reimbursement-based policy. Reimbursement. Keyword reimbursement. So I had to have some type of resources first to be able to pay for these things, and then I get reimbursed back. And even with that, you're denying 70% of us. And that was just not acceptable to me. So we found out At that time, we had 48 hours. One of the things we were able to change is moving us from being one of the worst of the 50 states in regards to victims only having 48 hours to report a crime to police. We were able to move that up to 14 days.
Wow.
We were also able to enhance eligibility for funeral expense reimbursements to extended family members. In fact, it's written in the policy, third degree of consanguination, which is like great-grandmother, uncles, cousins. As we know, in marginalized communities that are disproportionately impacted by crime, a lot of those people are dependent on extended family members to help them pay. And so now they can get reimbursements when those family members are paying out of pocket to help with burial services. We're also able to open up reimbursement for mental health expenses to anyone in the household of the person who was victimized. We were able to educate our sponsors and co-sponsors that the people inside the household are also traumatized when something happens to an individual, whether they're killed or harmed in some other way. That mentally impacts everybody in that household. And so now they are also able to get those reimbursements. But we still got a lot of work to do. One of the main issues in Tennessee is many of our victims are denied compensation due to this culpability piece. I have a mother whose son was killed. This is just an example. He was sitting on the front porch, and somebody down the street, 5 houses down, was shooting up a house, but he had a gun with a switch on it. And so he lost control of the weapon, and her son was killed by a stray bullet.
Wow.
And she was denied compensation because they said that her son was suspected to be in a gang. And she went and got like 400 signatures to say otherwise and still was denied. But when we're talking about language, and especially in communities that have high police presence and a lot of police interaction, everybody that lives in the neighborhood could have in their file suspected gang member or suspected drug user or suspected drug dealer. Anybody who has any type of contact with the police could have that ultimately in their police report. And them being able to use that to deny our victims support with their expenses that they've incurred is disgraceful. Also, especially when looking at the Survivor Bill of Rights that CSSJ came up with, it really fell in line with some things that I'm hearing from a lot of victims here, is that needing more time off work than normally, being able to put something in place so that you're not dependent on employers that have a heart, because most likely, even if they have a heart, their bottom line says otherwise, or what they think is their bottom line. They're not being allowed time off of work. They're not being able to say, hey, I just can't do this today. You know, I'm traumatized. I'm dealing with whatever, and not being forced to come in. And also a big one that we find is most people cannot relocate, either due to not even having the financial resources to relocate, but being able to get out of leases without having to be dealing with potential credit ramifications and evictions on your record. And that's a big deal that our survivors have to deal with. So we still have a long way to go. Hopefully within the next year, we're making some changes. And of course, we want to extend it past those 14 days. We want to join the states who were able to just have that open-ended time frame.
Wow, that's amazing. You know, you came to a webinar, and thank you whoever shared that information with you and learned about the work of CSSJ and being part of this community and getting trained. And as part of that, you changed victim compensation in the state of Tennessee, which is amazing. So congratulations to you, the organization, and all the survivors and advocates that played a huge role extending that time limit, getting more family members opportunities to apply, being able to include mental health as an expense. That's huge. As you talked about, more work has to be done. And I think you're also doing that work. Can you talk a little bit about these regional convenings that you've been hosting to help educate people about this new law change?
Yeah. So as you remember the stat that I used earlier of 90% of victims don't even apply because they are either unaware or discouraged from applying. The organization that we did this bill with is called Tennesseans for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. We honor life through the abolishment of the death penalty. Our mission is to support victims and to focus on community-based violence prevention. And so we were previously working on legislative work for things related to the death penalty. And fortunately, due to a moratorium on the death penalty, it allowed us to focus on some legislation in this area. And so when this came up, it was a fantastic way for us to be able to bring more victims advocacy organizations to the table. A lot of the organizations that legislators use to be our voices are organizations that service primarily white victims. But a lot of your on-the-ground, in the hood victims organizations, we all get together in the church and cry and share our tears, and we march when somebody else gets shot or killed. We were able to bring those organizations to the table, and that was a big deal. The next step was, after we passed this bill, okay, now I got 90% of people that don't even know about it. How do we reach them? We partnered Tennesseans for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. We were able to partner them with the organization that has saved my life, Mothers Over Murder. They were able to come together and host this, we call it the Healed People campaign. So we're basically a tour that's going across Tennessee to educate victims. We kicked off in Memphis a couple of months ago, and we're going to be in Chattanooga on November 14th and 15th. And so day one of that conference, it looks like a victims workshop where we have the directors from the Treasury Department. These are the individuals where the criminal injuries compensation policy is housed. We have those individuals that are actually providing training to these victims that probably would not have received these resources in any other way. And they show them how to apply and what type of a documentation is required to be able to ensure they get approved. In addition, they talk them through what the appeals process looks like if they are in fact denied. But not only are we having those individuals educate those victims, but at the same time, we have a panel where those victims are speaking their truths, talking about the good and bad of what it looked like when they apply for victims' compensation. So that's our way of using these survivors and their stories to do more work in informing our Treasury directors and being more trauma informed. We kicked it off in Memphis because I was sitting in the legislation all the time while we were working on this victims' compensation bill, and I was constantly hearing about these bills that were trying to be passed to over-police and over-incarcerate our juveniles, coming up with more crimes that they can charge juveniles and adults. And I was like, what the heck? And they kept using Memphis as the justification behind this legislation. And I was like, you know what? It feels horrible. Our voices are being hijacked, and the policies that are being passed are harming our children in our communities. And it's the second day of the conference. We call it Bringing the Calvary. We are the Calvary. Reimagining public safety. And here in this space, we uplift the voices of our community-based violence preventers and interveners in the work that they're doing, bringing them together in a collective. Also in educating the community on what does that look like? What does public safety look like when you start to imagine it? And it's an exercise that we do where we have them close their eyes and envision what a neighborhood looks like where you feel safe. And nobody ever answers that it's police riding up and down their streets.
Yeah.
We'll be ending that conference in 2025 in Nashville, and hopefully by that time, we will have enough research and support to be able to present some other bills to the legislator and being able to kick off the next session in Tennessee with some more bills that support victims.
Pale people bringing a Calvary. Would you actually bring together government, survivors, community leaders, public safety, community violence intervention, criminal justice reform organizations to not only gather more perspectives on these issues, but look at what actually could happen as it relates to reimagining public safety and helping survivors and preventing crime as well? And so, you talked about the collaboration between community and government. I think it's incredible that you saw the importance of not only passing the law, but making sure that people are educated about it, hear from those in the Department of Treasury, on how to access the program. Just once again, I love having these conversations with individuals like you, Rafiah. That's really why we founded our organization, is really to partner and lift up leaders like you across the country. And as part of that, I'm still on level 10 coming out of our Crime Survivors Speak March on Washington. And so September 23rd and 24th, we hosted the first ever Crime Survivors Speak March on Washington, bringing together thousands of survivors, hundreds of organizations across the country to our nation's capital in DC for a welcome reception, which was beautiful at Union Station. I was blown away at how many people was at that welcome reception that Monday, which is also our travel day as well. And then the following day, we hosted a march, a rally at the National Mall and at the Capitol, and also amazing healing festival as well. As we're planning the March on Washington event, I'm sitting next to Jonathan Lewis, who's our managing director at Crime Survivors Safety and Justice. We're going over all the partners and what states that's committing and what's coming to DC. And I'm looking over the list and I said, I don't see Rafiah. So I said, Jonathan, call Rafiah. So Jonathan picked up the phone, and this is probably 2 weeks before the March on Washington event. We'd have no buses, no survivors from Tennessee currently part of the event. But Rafiah, we called you and said, hey, we're hosting this March on Washington event, and we need you to bring 100 survivors, right? I thought we were crazy when we said that. But Rafiah, man, it was incredible to see that in less than 2 weeks, you've organized buses from across the state of Tennessee and got survivors and organizations and advocates to be part of this historic Crime Survivors Speak March on Washington. We'd love to hear a little bit about what that day was like for you and the survivors that you brought to the event, and why was that important?
I do have to point out that the reason why Tennessee wasn't on there, or I wasn't on there, is because I wasn't in the organizing space. I was in spaces of sharing my story and talking to legislators and talking to the 25 mothers that's in my group, but I didn't have no big, ginormous community. I was like, I don't know if we're going to be able to get all these people. But we went to the Memphis conference, and so I said to those people, I said, we're going to Washington. There's this opportunity. I know this is late notice. We got a week to sign up.
Yeah.
We got a week to sign up, and we're not talking about just signing up for a bus trip. Me and Juan Pablo were on the phone every day, all day long, breaking dawn to end of the nights. But they showed up. We had about 70 people from Memphis. We had 30 survivors from Nashville. They were on high. They're still calling me every day. Statements like, I'm finally free. I've been holding on to this pain for 30 years. I'm finally free. Or what's our next steps? When is CSSJ coming to Tennessee? And they are excited, and we're not going to lose that momentum. And this is one of the beautiful things that we saw in D.C. It was predominantly victims of color.
Yeah.
And so when we're talking about uplifting these voices of victims, we're talking about uplifting the voices of victims who are disproportionately impacted by crime. Those are the voices that should be used to determine what the appropriate legislation are. And so they're excited, and it feels good for that excitement. Thank you so much. Man, that was God. You calling, that was God. All the people showing up was God. We got there. We showed out. It was only 100 of us, but I swear I think we was the loudest out there.
Tennessee was definitely representing, and you said only 100, while other states and other partners had months of planning this event. You all literally had 2 weeks, and I think it's just a testament to who you are as a person and how you are just such an inspiring leader. It wasn't surprising to us that Rafiah would be organizing 100 survivors, and not only organizing, but getting them on that long bus ride from Tennessee to be part of this amazing event in DC. And you can watch the event. It's on our website at www.cssj.org to watch the replay of the event if you weren't a part of that. And in the new year, hopefully our Right to Heal bill, or the official name is Survivor Bill of Rights, will be introduced as federal legislation. We're hoping in January. So more to come on the policy priorities that we were calling on in DC. After we had that amazing March on Washington, I'm going to share something that most people do not know. I remember immediately after the event was over, I had a mom came up to me, whose son was murdered. She came up to me and she did not agree with what we were calling for as part of our DC event and advocating for prevention programs and rehabilitation for people that cause harm. And it was a very tough conversation for me because I know what she's going through. And I agree that there needs to be accountability and justice. And you were right there listening to the conversation. And Rafiah, you stepped in. That meant so much for me, for you to step into that conversation. But I would love to just hear, why did you step in to support me in that conversation? Why did you step in to provide your perspective as another mother that lost a child to violence, and why are we advocating for those type of policies?
I could feel her pain. I was like, oh my God, I just was called over there. God just sent me to her as a mother who had lost my own child. And I tell people all the time, this is not a pain marathon where we go try to say who has lost the most or whose was most horrific. But I do know that not only losing my son, but holding my son while he told me that he was dying sometimes gives me credibility. And people at the beginning of their healing journey and have not been able to find that peace yet. And so I felt called to at least share those pieces with her. And then I stepped back. I'm never going to force feed. Finding peace is a journey. Forgiveness is a journey. And she needed to be heard. She needed to feel heard. I only want to share just enough to not take away from her being able to say her piece. She's on my mind. Every day I pray for her.
I thank you because I needed you in that moment, because I saw her pain, her frustration. I saw the need to get justice for her son. For me, doing this work across the country and meeting with so many mothers and parents that have lost children to gun violence and meeting with other survivors, that's the hardest part of this work that we do at Crime Survivor Safety and Justice is meeting with survivors across many different victim experiences that don't have no justice. Meeting with so many survivors that don't have any access to healing, are being denied, but also being disregarded and disrespected for decades. And I've been thinking about her since that. It's one of the reasons why I get up every day to do this work for survivors and families like her. So Rafiah, just want to thank you for supporting me in that moment. And you just don't know how much that meant to me to have you there, not only to support me, but also to support that mother as well. And we send her love and support. We also send her strength as she seeks justice for her child, as we do for many survivors across the country that's going through that experience of losing a loved one and getting no justice as well. So the survivors in Tennessee are like, what's next, right? In our organization, how do you think Tennessee would benefit from building a statewide chapter of Crime Survivor Safety and Justice, not only support survivors across the state, but really to build a network of survivors that are engaging and organizing in advocacy?
We could definitely benefit for a chapter here. They're ready to be uplifted. They're ready to be engaged. They want to show up. And this gives them an opportunity to get a better way of being organized and getting more information. Like I said, a lot of times when we're talking about survivor groups that are just on the ground, a lot of times those organizations are started just out of somebody's pain. I got pain. I'm trying to heal. I'm going to bring some more people and we're going to heal together. But a lot of them don't have the resources and the knowledge yet on what that looks like. Or they think that getting involved in legislative work and policy work and organizing in those spaces is something that is a big undertaking. And this allows them to be able to see it's not. It's not. I joke with Miss Clemmy all the time. Miss Clemmy, who is the CEO and founder of Mothers Over Murder, Nashville Peacemakers. Mothers Over Murder is her flagship program. But she always joke all the time. They tried to get me to the State House many years ago, and the only person that can get me back here is Rafiah. Oh, my God. She was like, come in here and talk to who? I ain't doing it. And being able to bring them in there and sitting in the galleys and just seeing how that process worked, having them speak with legislators. I created one-pagers for them to be able to go in and talk about what we were fighting for. And those are things that they had no idea how to do. So I definitely think that crime survivors and safety and justice not only could help them with the ways of having that support through other people that are in community, help prioritize healing, what that rehabilitation looks like. Peer support, that's the best ways that you can put one foot in front of the other and be able to see a light at the end of the tunnel from what you've gone through. So we are over here praying that CSSJ in Tennessee is something that is up and coming. I think it's definitely a good way for us to be a part of changing that narrative that has been given to our victims' voices and saying these are the things we want, and us being able to say what we want. Yes, we want crime to be a gest that centers on those survivors and the priorities of healing and the prevention over punishment. CSSJ in Tennessee could lead to landmark policy changes that actually make our community safer. So we're over here praying.
Your prayers have been answered. I can say this now, Rafiah, that we are extremely excited to partner with you all to bring crime survivor for safety and justice to Tennessee. And we have a goal. Yes, we have a goal in mind to launch Crime Survivor Safety and Justice Tennessee in March of 2025. And so excited to work with you all. Our team will be in touch with you and other leaders of what that will look like, which will include more training. We're developing toolkits, resources, developing campaign strategies to use as templates. But yes, we're excited and thank you for helping us see what this volunteer model of Crime Survivor for Safety and Justice looks like as the first step to launch our model in more states as well. It's been a pleasure getting to know you and just seeing your leadership impact policies and laws related to crime victims, policies and laws related to the death penalty, related to violence prevention, related to criminal justice reform, related to helping young parents. And my last question before we wrap up today's episode is, what advice would you give to others who may be struggling to find purpose after tragedy, or who will want to turn their pain into meaningful action like you have?
First off, don't rush the healing process. Give yourself grace to grieve. Acknowledge your feelings. Find your people. I was blessed that my best friend unfortunately lost her child right before I lost mine. And so we've been able to do this walk together. But sharing our stories just really helps you get through that time. And it leads to you finding your voice. What does that look like? Don't feel like you got to go and just come out with something that's a bang. When we're talking about our loved one, we feel like we got to go do something that's like ginormous. Start small, volunteering, writing, speaking out. Those things will lead to bigger changes over time. And continuously, no matter what, always focus on your healing. Stay open to change. What's your vision of how you find your purpose may change. I had no idea what Rodney's Village was going to look like when I first had the vision of Rodney's Village. But I took the last 4 years and I've been in community, volunteering, speaking with other people to get an idea of what that culminated to be. Honoring your loved ones can be through all kinds of ways. It can be through advocacy work. It can be through community service. It could be through painting. One of my old friends, I didn't know she had lost her son, but she reached out to me yesterday. She was an old coworker from many years back, and she follows me on Facebook and reached out to me last night about how she's been following my story, and that helped her find her purpose through painting. Just like there's the steps to grieving, there's the steps to forgiveness, and there's the steps to finding your purpose through your pain. Thank you so much for having me here. I appreciate that.
Of
this
course,
helps.
No, we appreciate you. I'm looking forward to us partnering together. If you are out there listening, especially if you're in Tennessee, Crime Survivor for Safety and Justice is coming to your state in 2025. We'll also support Rafiah's work at Rodney's Village, which is also part of Mothers Over Murder, and also support Tennesseans for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. Rafiah, thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm excited to continue to see the amazing work that you are doing. To all of our listeners, thank you so much to everyone for listening to today's episode. To become a member of Crime Survivor for Safety and Justice or join our email list, you can visit the website at www.cssj.org. Soon you will be able to sign up to become a member of the Tennessee chapter as well, so stay tuned about more updates and where we're going to be developing chapters in 2025. Remember, you can tune into all podcast episodes on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other streaming platforms. We are healing through action. And Rafiah, when survivors speak,
change happens.
There we go. Thank you all so much. Talk to you all soon.